Hey plant lovers, welcome back. Most people treat their Christmas cactus like a cactus. That's the first mistake. They set it on a sunny windowsill next to the succulents, let the soil go bone dry for weeks, wonder why the stem segments shrivel and drop, and then, every November, they walk through Home Depot, see those brilliant cascading blooms in pink and fuchsia and pure white, and wonder what they're doing differently. Here's the thing. The Christmas cactus isn't a cactus the way a saguaro is a cactus. It evolved in a completely different world. And once you understand that world, every care mistake becomes obvious, and every revival becomes straightforward. The plant's full name is Schlumbergera, named after Frederick Schlumberger, a Belgian horticulturist who helped bring it to European cultivation in the 1800s. But its true home is the Serra dos Orgos in southeastern Brazil, a ridge of coastal mountains draped in humid Atlantic forest, where the air rarely drops below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cloud cover is routine, and everything is perpetually misted. And this is the key part. The Christmas cactus doesn't grow in soil there. It grows in the bark of trees. It wedges its roots into the crevices of moss-covered branches, pulling moisture from humidity and rain, and the slow decomposition of fallen leaves caught in the canopy above it. Botanists call this epiphytic. It lives on other plants without parasitizing them, like an orchid, not a weed. There is no deep soil, no reserves to fall back on, just the constant, moderate moisture of a cloud forest, filtered light through a canopy, and cool nights. When you understand that origin, you stop asking, "How often do I water?" and start asking, what does a tree branch environment actually feel like? The answer is, never bone dry, never soaking wet, always humid, never scorched. Now here's what I want to talk about today. What happens when a Christmas cactus genuinely struggles? The wrinkled segments, the slow growth, the color going dull, and the specific steps that actually bring it back. Not the myths. Not the kitchen sink remedies you'll find everywhere. The biology-backed process that respects what this plant actually is. If you're new here and you want more content like this, plant care built around how plants actually work, not just what to do, subscribing costs you nothing, and it genuinely helps this channel reach people who are quietly wondering why their plants keep failing. Let's start with the diagnosis, because not all struggling Christmas cacti have the same problem, and the solution depends entirely on the cause. Wrinkled, slightly deflated stem segments are the most common distress signal people bring to me. The segments themselves, the flat, jointed pads that chain together into cascading stems, are where the plant stores most of its water. When they're plump and firm, the plant is hydrated and healthy. When they look soft and slightly puckered, like a grape that's been sitting in the sun, you have a water problem. The question is which direction. Both overwatering and underwatering produce wrinkled segments. That seems contradictory, but it isn't. Underwatering is obvious. The plant ran out of reserves. But overwatering destroys roots, and once the roots are gone, the plant can no longer draw up moisture even when the soil is wet. So you can have soggy soil and a dehydrated plant at the same time. When I see wrinkled segments alongside dark, mushy soil and a pot with no drainage, that's the diagnosis right there. The other signal is pace. A Christmas cactus that was growing steadily and suddenly slows down or stops producing new segments entirely is often telling you something about its roots. Either they've used up the available nutrient space in the current pot, or the growing medium has broken down so much it started compressing around the roots instead of supporting them. That's the point where repotting becomes not just useful, but necessary. There's also a third signal that people miss almost entirely because it looks like success. A plant that blooms once, beautifully, and then never blooms the same way again. That first bloom often came baked in. Nurseries in states like Oregon and California use controlled light deprivation and cool rooms to trigger buds before the plant ever reaches a store shelf in Ohio or Texas. Once that artificially triggered bloom cycle ends, the plant is now in your home, with your lighting conditions and your heating schedule, and it has no idea it's supposed to bloom in December. The calendar doesn't mean anything to the plant. The environment does. So when I say a plant is struggling, I include the plant that looks perfectly green and healthy all year but never produces a single bud. That's a plant whose biological environment hasn't been matched to its needs, and it's one of the most fixable problems in houseplant care. Pay attention to the color and texture of the segments across the whole plant, not just the newest growth. New segments at the tips of the stems should be a slightly brighter, more tender green than the older segments toward the base. If the entire plant is uniformly pale, more yellow-green than deep forest green, the plant is either getting too much direct sun or not getting enough light at the right wavelength. The flat segments, which the botanists call phylloclades, are doing photosynthesis directly. They evolved for the dappled, diffuse light of a forest canopy, and that specific quality of light, bright but scattered, not concentrated, is what drives the chemistry inside them. Too much direct sun bleaches the chlorophyll. Too little light, and the segments produce less of everything the plant needs to grow and eventually flower. Before we get into the repotting process, let me say something about soil, because this is where the confusion runs deepest. Most standard potting mixes, the kind you grab off the shelf at Lowe's, are formulated for tropical foliage plants that want moisture retention. That's wrong for a Christmas cactus. Remember where it came from: tree bark, canopy crevices, rain that drains through instantly with no reservoir below. The root system of a Schlumbergera is designed for fast drainage and high aeration, not for sitting in a wet, compacted medium. Dan Marr at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who wrote the Standard Extension Guide on Holiday Cactus Care, is clear on this. These plants need a porous, well-draining medium, and the original soil they came home from the nursery in is often too dense for long-term health. A mix that holds moisture while staying airy is the goal. Roughly equal parts standard potting mix and perlite, or a blend formulated for orchids and epiphytes, which mimics the loose, bark-heavy structure of the plant's natural habitat. Some people add a small measure of coarse sand to open it up further. The exact ratio matters less than the principle. Water should move through in seconds, not minutes. Now to the process itself. Start by taking the plant out of its pot. Do this gently, working the root ball free without pulling on the stems, because the segments at the tips are fragile and will snap or drop. Once it's out, take a look at the roots. Healthy Christmas cactus roots are fine, pale, and slightly fuzzy, more like orchid roots than the thick taproots of a garden perennial. They spread outward in a dense mat rather than driving deep. If you see roots that are brown and slimy or that crumble when you touch them, those are gone. You need to remove them with clean, disinfected shears before repotting, because dead roots sitting in new soil will rot and spread bacterial infection into healthy tissue. If the damage is significant, cut your losses. Take cuttings from healthy segments for propagation, which I'll come back to in a moment, and give the base plant a fresh start with dramatically less root mass to support. Once you've cleared out the damaged roots, let the plant rest in a shaded spot with good airflow for a day before repotting. This isn't optional. The cut surfaces on the roots need to dry out and form a protective callus before they contact fresh moisture. If you skip this step and go straight into new damp soil, the open cuts become entry points for the same pathogens you just tried to remove. Think of it the way a surgeon thinks about a wound: closure before exposure. When you choose the new pot, go one size up from what the plant was in. Not 2, not 3, 1. This is one of the places where the instinct to be generous actually works against you. Christmas cacti bloom better when they're slightly root-bound, meaning the roots fill the pot comfortably but aren't being strangled. A pot that's too large holds far more moisture than the root system can process, and that excess moisture sits in the lower half of the pot, slowly creating anaerobic conditions where rot-causing bacteria thrive. The University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension Guide specifically recommends a snug fit. The pot should also have a drainage hole, not just holes in theory, but functioning drainage that lets water pass freely when you water from above. Decorative ceramic pots without drainage are lovely on a shelf, but they are root rot waiting to happen. If the pot you love doesn't drain, plant into a plain nursery pot that fits inside it, and lift the nursery pot out when you water. Fill the bottom third of the new pot with your airy mix. Set the plant so the base sits slightly lower than the rim, room to add mix and water without overflowing. And fill in around the roots gently, pressing just enough to eliminate large air pockets without compacting the medium. Water once, lightly, to help the medium settle around the roots, and then put the watering can away. The plant needs to stabilize for a week or two before you resume a regular watering schedule. New roots need to begin sensing the moisture gradient in the fresh medium on their own, and overwatering immediately after repotting is one of the most common ways people undo all the work they just did. Now, here's where I want to address something you've probably seen mentioned in gardening content: using turmeric as part of the care process. The idea comes from the fact that curcumin, the compound that gives turmeric its vivid yellow color, has demonstrated antifungal and antibacterial properties in laboratory research. That part is real, but there's an important distinction between lab research and practical plant application, and it's worth being honest about. The concentrations used in scientific studies are much higher and more controlled than what you'd produce by dissolving a tablespoon of kitchen turmeric in water. Iowa State University Extension, whose plant diagnostics resources are among the most thorough in the country, doesn't include turmeric in their root care protocols. Neither does the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Holiday Cactus Guide. That doesn't mean it causes harm. A dilute turmeric rinse is gentle enough that it's unlikely to hurt a plant. But if you're relying on it as your primary antifungal treatment for a plant with serious root rot, you may be addressing the symptom and not the cause, which is almost always soil, drainage, or watering frequency. The real intervention, the one that actually changes the trajectory of a struggling Christmas cactus, is getting the growing environment right. Medium, drainage, light, and the watering approach. Those four things determine whether this plant thrives. On watering, the Christmas cactus needs consistent moisture, but never saturation. Iowa State Extension is specific about this. Water when the top inch of the growing medium is dry to the touch. Not when the whole pot is dry, not on a fixed schedule, but when that top inch loses its moisture. Water deeply enough that it flows through the drainage holes. Then, discard what's collected in the tray after 15 minutes. Standing water beneath a Christmas cactus pot is one of the most common causes of slow root rot, and it happens gradually enough that most people never connect the standing water to the eventual decline. If you use a self-watering pot or a pot without drainage, you're fighting the plant's biology. Every variety in the Schlumbergera genus evolved to drain instantly. There is no workaround for that. Light is where the second most common mistake happens. People who know desert cacti need full sun apply that logic to the Christmas cactus and burn it. A south-facing window in direct afternoon sun will bleach and damage the segments within a few weeks, turning them a washed-out reddish yellow that looks like sun-scald, because it is. What the Christmas cactus wants is bright, indirect light. Enough intensity to drive photosynthesis through those flat green segments, which are doing the work that leaves would normally do, but filtered through a curtain or coming from a window that doesn't get harsh direct afternoon exposure. An east-facing window is nearly ideal for most parts of the country. North-facing works in brighter climates. The segments should look rich, deep green. That's the color of a well-lit, well-hydrated plant. Temperature is the variable most people overlook entirely, and it turns out to be deeply connected to whether the plant ever blooms again. The Christmas cactus is a short-day plant. That specific terminology means it needs extended periods of uninterrupted darkness, at least 14 hours per night, combined with cooler temperatures to trigger the hormonal shift that produces flower buds. In its native Brazilian mountains, the autumn and winter nights are longer and cooler than the warm, humid growing season. And that shift is the environmental signal the plant has evolved to read as time to bloom. In your home, that signal gets interrupted. Streetlights, lamps left on, a television in the same room. The University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension Guide on Holiday Cacti specifically flags artificial light at night as one of the primary reasons houseplant Christmas cacti fail to rebloom year after year. If you want flowers in December, you need to start managing the light environment in October, moving the plant to a room that stays genuinely dark from sundown, or covering it consistently each evening around 6 o'clock for 6 to 8 weeks. The temperature should be on the cooler side, somewhere between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. A spare bedroom that you don't heat heavily at night, or a spot near a cool exterior wall, can work without any special equipment. Here's where it gets interesting. The blooming signal isn't just about darkness, it's about the interaction between day length and temperature, what plant physiologists call thermophotoperiodism. Studies on Schlumbergera cultivars show that plants develop buds best when both conditions are present simultaneously, short days and cool nights together, not one without the other. You can give a Christmas cactus perfect darkness, but if it's sitting on top of a heating vent in a 75-degree room, it may still refuse to set buds. The cool nights are doing something the darkness alone can't accomplish. They're slowing the plant's metabolic rate in a way that shifts its internal resource allocation toward reproduction. Once buds are set, bring the plant back to its normal bright indirect location and stop the darkness protocol. Flower buds will develop over the following weeks, and if you resist the urge to move the plant once buds appear, you'll get the full show. One more thing on reviving a struggling plant: pinching and propagation. After the plant has been repotted and had several weeks to stabilize, you can encourage new branching growth by gently twisting off the last 1 or 2 segments at the tip of each stem. This isn't just cosmetic. By removing the terminal segment, you redirect the plant's energy into lateral branching, which means more growing tips, which means more potential bloom sites the following season. The University of Wisconsin-Madison Guide recommends doing this in the late spring, once the post-bloom rest period is over and new vegetative growth has resumed. Do it too early while the plant is still in recovery, and you're adding stress it can't handle. Wait until the segments look plump and the plant is clearly pushing new growth. Let me also say something about fertilizing, because it sits in a specific window, and ignoring those boundaries is why a lot of well-intentioned care still produces plants that won't bloom. During the spring and summer growing season, roughly April through September, the Christmas cactus is doing the main work of building new stem segments and root mass. That's the window to feed it, with a balanced, water-soluble fertilizer at half strength, roughly once a month. Nothing excessive. The plant's native tree bark environment isn't nutrient-rich, and over-fertilizing produces lush vegetative growth at the expense of flowers. When October arrives and you begin the darkness protocol to trigger blooming, stop feeding entirely. A plant that's receiving a nitrogen push in fall will keep growing leaves when it should be preparing buds. Resume feeding the following spring, after the bloom cycle is fully finished and the plant has had a few weeks to rest. The segments you pinch off don't have to go in the trash. A cutting of 2 or 3 segments, twisted apart at the natural joint rather than cut with scissors, will root readily in a mix of equal parts perlite and peat, kept barely moist and out of direct light. Iowa State Extension recommends letting the cut end callus for 1 to 3 days before placing it in the rooting medium, for exactly the reason I mentioned earlier: closing the wound before exposing it to moisture. Roots typically form in 4 to 6 weeks. Once the cutting resists a gentle tug, it's established enough to pot up into a full growing mix. The thing about Christmas cactus cuttings is that they carry the genetics of the parent plant exactly, which means if your parent is a particularly vivid shade of fuchsia or a rare creamy white, every cutting will produce the same flower. People pass these plants down through families across generations. There are documented cases of Christmas cacti over 100 years old, still blooming annually. A plant that came home for $3 at a post-holiday clearance sale at Home Depot in 2024 could still be on someone's windowsill in 2024. That longevity isn't luck. It's the result of the growing environment matching the plant's actual biology rather than fighting it. The Christmas cactus doesn't ask for much. Airy soil, consistent moderate moisture, filtered light, cool dark nights in autumn, and a pot it can grow comfortably into without being overwhelmed by too much empty growing medium. Get those things right, and the plant will bloom reliably every December, without any tricks, without any forced interventions, without any kitchen remedies substituting for real understanding. Think about the math of that. A Christmas cactus purchased at a Home Depot clearance sale today for $3 could, with nothing more than correct care, be on a windowsill in 2024. It will outlive the house it's growing in if someone keeps repotting it and passing it forward. That's not a plant. That's a commitment. And the only thing standing between a $3 holiday impulse purchase and a century-long family heirloom is understanding what kind of world the plant evolved in, and giving it a version of that world in your home. The segments should be plump. The color should be deep green. And come late November, when the days have shortened and the nights have dropped, the buds will form at the tips of every stem. Small, tight, and impossible to miss. Give it another week, then another. And one morning, you'll walk into the room and the whole plant will have opened overnight, hanging in pink or red or white, like something that belongs in a cloud forest in southeastern Brazil, which is exactly where it came from. If this gave you something useful for your plant, or if you have a Christmas cactus you've been struggling with for years, drop a comment below and tell me what you're working with. The comment section is genuinely the best part of this. Different plants, different homes, different problems, and we figure it out together. Take care of your plants.